A very warm good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, viewers. I'm Matthias Aufiku, news editor of the Namibian Sun newspaper. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Evening Review Show. Well, tonight we speak budget matters. Of course, the finance minister yesterday tabled the budget for the year. A colossal 84.6 billion Namibian dollars. Well, a figure never reached since the history of the country. It signals a jump of almost 10% compared to last year. And to unpack that conversation, we have Mr. Salomo Hei in studio, the Managing Director of the High Economic Intelligence. Welcome, sir, and good evening.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
No, it's good to always have you on set. Well, your initial reactions?
Yeah, well, I think I'm with you. I think it's a milestone. 80 plus billion budget that we had never seen before since independence. I think we are moving towards a bit of now, I think the minister is slowly releasing the shackles. I think if you look at the pillars that underpins the budget, the three pillars, it used to be, the first one always used to be fiscal consolidation, but now what he has is fiscal sustainability. So I think the narrative is changing, and you can see in the general increase in terms of actual numbers from last year to this year. So fiscal sustainability, he speaks of pro-poor. Pro-poor in the context that the most vulnerable in our society are being taken care of. I think what is worth mentioning there is the threshold of minimal taxable income. Remember, there was consideration on 50,000. There's now, it's been moved up to 100,000, so it's a bit of relief. There's the, is it from 250 or 350 for the disability grant? From the under 18s, it's a huge number, to 1,400. There's the relief towards pensioners. So that's really the pro-growth that we are talking about. Sorry, the pro-poor that we are talking about. In terms of pro-growth, you can see that there's been a bit of movement towards the capital budget. Yeah. We would have wanted to see a bit more. But nevertheless, I think in relation to last year, it's encouraging. However, the minister also mentioned about the current outturn in terms of the spending on the different budget votes. I think he mentioned that just over 70% of the capital budget has currently been spent by January 2023. Ideally, you would have wanted it to be spent a bit more. But maybe that can be also attributed to the public procurement issues in terms of the inability to really allocate much quicker, and at times the reviews that takes place, so it means that the budget votes do not go to the implementation part. I think those are the three sort of pillars that he spoke about. Education again got a big chunk. I think it's around 600.
16 billion.
16 billion, sorry. 16 billion. Yeah, 16 billion, of which 577 million is going to the infrastructure side, and the rest to salaries to increase the teacher-to-child ratio. And again, I mean, we did the numbers from 1990 to 2022. For every dollar that was spent on the budget, 19 cents of that went to education. I think, again, in the Honorable Minister's own words, he says that the issue is not about lack of funds. I think there's a bigger problem in education because the funding is there. So we would have wanted to see a bit of reform strategies, outcome-based solutions in respect of the sector. That was didn't come through strongly. Obviously, there was a mention of MIDCO. In terms of where MIDCO is going or what the discussion is, given that there's been in the news lately. There's also a conversation around Transnamib in terms of to upgrade the current railway, perhaps thinking about potential threat that could come as a consequence of the tripod to Botswana, and our railway runs until into Hobabe, so maybe there's synergies that could be found there. But I think the biggest performer is really on the revenue side, in terms of what's projected for 2023-24, which is encouraging because that's essentially how you fund the budget. And there is 24 billion that's coming from the SACU kitty, which is quite big. And one must be really out of an abundance of caution. really not be overly reliant on the SACCO revenue, because you never know what's going to happen. You remember that I think 2015, 2016, when they pulled the rug under our feet because they revised the formula, the difficulty that we had. But over and above that, you see that there's been good returns on corporate tax, dividends of 2.5 billion that has been paid. I think there's a 9.6 unallocated shares of MTC that's still to come. So I think over and above, it was really a fair budget.
Yeah.
I think in the past 4 to 5 years that we had, this is perhaps our better budget.
Yeah.
From a spending projection perspective, the 80 plus billion milestone that we have reached.
Yeah.
So I think those are really my initial reflections.
Yeah. So considering where we've moved from economically the past 5 to 6 years, it's been tough for the country. You've mentioned that perhaps the minister is moving towards removing the shackles. Are we ready to remove the shackles?
Well, I think what you also need to look at is, I think there was a big conversation around the debt, right, and the deficit in terms of the variation and how big it was. You know that I'm one of I'm of the view that it's not really the size of the debt, it's the direction of debt. But obviously we all agree that I think within a short period of time we ramped up debt very quickly, right? Which is concerning, and more so also because at the point we couldn't really show where debt was going. So towards the productive side of the economy. Now remember that when you take out debt, especially you want to make sure that it funds sort of the long-term investments, but we weren't seeing long-term investments. We're rather seeing current issues that we had to fund with this debt. But the long and short of it is that, one, if you look at where we were last year in terms of debt to GDP and to where we are now, you can see that we're back to the slow growth in debt. The slow growth in debt is a consequence of the revenue side that's coming in. So it's sort of bringing debt down. But what is also important is really to increase GDP, because once you bring GDP, then the debt to GDP then will decline, because GDP becoming the common denominator becomes bigger, so it means that debt will decline. So in terms of removing the shackles, to that extent I think there's room to maneuver, because on the one side revenue has improved, and we hope that NAMRA can continue on that trend. Or on the other side, we want to see GDP grow, and once GDP grow, again, the ripple effect is mean that there's going to be public finances will improve, and subsequently the fiscal position will improve, and subsequently the shackles will be loosened further. So I think looking at those sort of metrics now, with the debt to GDP, the current deficit that you see now, it's also come down. I think there's room to maneuver. I think the minister also spoke about the off-balance sheet support that will come to the infrastructure budget through aid and foreign contributions. So to that end, you do see that perhaps there's a bit of movement. Again, the proof is in the pudding. Another one that's worth mentioning as well is really the code of good practice that was initially in the previous last year's budget. It has come in again now for this year, which sounds as if it's really now ready for implementation, because it was launched I think 2 weeks ago or something. And generally what the document speaks about in the context of procurement, it really look inward for Namibianization. So you would have to sort of procure locally before you can look outside. And there are certain thresholds in terms of those maximum that you can actually allocate. So there's been some really positive signs in the budget this time around, and obviously there's still a few issues that need to be ironed out, but over and above that, for me, it was a fairly balanced budget this time around.
Well, balanced at the macro level, but at household level, we are still crying. We are still crying. So how do you then bring those two on par?
So obviously at household level is that inflation has not been kind to us, and inflation in the context that it's really almost what we would refer to as long COVID of inflation. So we're having long inflation now because it was induced by the supply side constraints with regard to the pandemic, and we thought that, in fact, I was quite surprised to see the numbers that came in for January on inflation, because we had predicted that it would start showing a downward trend, but it's stubbornly remaining high. At some point we thought it was transitory, but clearly it's now becoming permanent. So the households is being hit hard. But the external environment in terms of the global economic outlook has improved, right? It has improved from last year, December, November, where it was predicted to have a global recession. I think in the beginning of the year to where we are now, it appears as things are looking up because of China opening up and subsequently manufacturing coming back. So it's a matter of time before things improve at the household level.
I don't know if we are that patient.
It's a matter of time. I mean, we hope that through the capital projects that perhaps could come on stream, Transnamic rehabilitation, we could create more jobs. And by creating more jobs, we could be putting a bit of money back into people's pockets. And at the same time, we hope that the inflationary pressure and on the other side, in terms of the interest rate cycle, will also now subside. Because I think with the interest rate cycle as well, at some point we need to give it time to start transmitting back into the economy, because you can't just keep raising it. And I think, again, on the Bank of Namibia's own account, they say that it takes between 12 to 18 months, and I think we have sort of run that cycle now. And I think at some point we need to stop cutting. And I'm not only referring to Bank of Namibia, I'm also speaking in respect of South Africa Reserve Bank, because really that's what dictate what we do because of the PEC and all other related issues.
Someone would then say, would you say the direction in which inflation is headed to and what government is trying to do, take for instance the budget tabled yesterday, well, pro-poor, pro-growth to a certain extent, if you want to say, do you think to a certain level the failure to control inflation, whether it's at the global level, is really impacting our ability to use the budget as a growth area?
Look, ordinarily, if you have the productive capacity that we have in Namibia, it's extremely difficult to sort of control factors like inflation, right? Because what you have is you are heavily dependent on imports. By extension, you are also importing inflation, right? Sorry, so that makes it extremely difficult for you to be able to deal with inflation in a manner that you address it. Even to the extent that you could stimulate local consumption, and by doing that, you could, for instance, weaken your currency, if it were, so that, for instance, the alternative approach that Turkey has taken, right, in terms of inflation is completely uncontrollable. They are cutting interest rates, but at the same time, local consumption is increasing, but at the same time, you're creating more jobs within the domestic economy. So countries with a bigger productive capacity are able to sort of maneuver with it. Now, in our situation, it's a bit tight in terms of how to maneuver, but there are certain things that we can do, not necessarily to look at the inflationary component, but really to bring the pro-growth economy to a pro-inclusive growth, right? Because if you look over the years, again, we never had a growth problem in terms of GDP. What we had is the exclusionary component of GDP growth. So you want to increase the pie, you know. You want to increase the number of participants in the economy. You want to increase the number of economic actors, because through that, you know that there's you are extending the net wider. There's greater participation, and some of the components that influence inflation will then have an impact on all of us. Because currently, we fighting inflation, right, that impact all of us as with interest rate. Now, we know that the majority are not have got the majority are not impacted by interest rates because they don't have facilities with the banks, right? They don't have mortgages, they don't have installment sales, they don't have credit cards. So the inflation problem remains, right? But we are using, I don't know whether we are using a tool that's comprehensive enough in the context of the Namibian economy. This is notwithstanding the PEG and all the arrangements that we have, the import cover and all of that, to be able to keep the necessary foreign reserves. So in the absence of the productive capacity that we need to be able to dictate to our inflation and to a certain extent control it, I think we are at the mercy of the global dynamics.
Yeah. Well, we'll head for a short break and we will continue this conversation. Well, to our viewers, we just head for a quick break and we'll be back to continue this conversation.
NMH at 1 brings you news from all across Namibia. If you would like to feature your brand or campaign on this platform, contact NMH1 at synergy.com.na. NMH at 1, your lunchtime news companion.
The My.NA Cars Show provides viewers with the best in-class cars content, engaging interviews, as well as a showcase of the latest cars-related news, products, and services. If you would like to feature your brand or campaign on this platform, contact My.NA at synergy.com.na. My.NA Cars, more than just a ride. Ohole So Nice is an entertainment show brought to you by the youth for the youth. This is a dating show that allows individuals to participate and be their own true selves. If you would like to feature your brand or campaign on this platform, contact Zone at synergy.com.na.
Well, welcome back from the short break. Well, Mr. Hei, let's transition the conversation a bit. You mentioned earlier on the impact that the procurement system sort of has on the rollout and full implementation of the budget. Things perhaps such as delays, as well emanating maybe from reviews of the entire procurement system. What are some of the red flags within the system that you think we should address?
Yeah. So look, I think that the conversation emanates from, we've got a capital budget and we've got the operational budget. Now we are a developing economy, and developing economy needs to be developed by the development budget, right? Now what's happening is that you ideally want to make sure that you spend your development, you implement your development budget completely, to be able to demonstrate to Treasury that we need more money to be able to develop certain projects. Because if you go to Treasury and tell Treasury that no, we want to do A, B, C, D, Treasury will turn around and tell you that no, but you have not been able to spend your votes, right? And subsequently, perhaps that could be one of the reasons why we are not really able to have an expanded development budget. Now, the development budget in the context of procurement means that those development projects go through a procurement process, right? So the procurement process, as we know it now, has been inhibited by whether it's growing pains from the because it's a newly established institution, or whether it's some of the issues that historical issues that come from the previous tender board, whatever it is. But the point is that I think you would find very few awards that goes unchallenged, right? They go unchallenged because there's either a review or there's either one or the other thing. I mean, the other one that was in the newspaper for the past year was the school or the hostel feeding, that went to the High Court and all of that. So there was no proper allocation. Or what then happened was the continuous award of those that had it. But the long and short of it is that the inability to fully max out the capital budget means that we are unable to transition into making the economy grow.
Yeah.
And on the back end of that is the procurement process, because you don't want the procurement process to be holding back that particular aspect of the economy. And currently, it appears that there are certain synergies that do not exist in terms of what is it that needs to be done to be able to make sure that one accelerate the economy through a business-friendly procurement process. So the code of good practice, like I indicated earlier, is perhaps one of those interventions. But generally, you do see a bit of bottlenecks within the procurement system, especially driven by the inability to spend, or the current outturn that we have on the capital budget.
Because over the years, we've seen that the issue has not really been about whether we have adequate or good policies in place, or, of course, the financial resources has been an issue. But like you say, the issue of court challenges and so on, does this speak to a system that has different parts that are not really talking one language?
Yeah, I think there is greater coordination needed to be able to make sure that we all move in unison, to be able to make a success of the interventions and the policy framework that we have put in place. Again, it's not only on the procurement side. You can even think about education as a sector. We've not been able to really produce the quality, or young people are falling through the cracks along the way. But given the rand and cents that we are spending on education, again, there's no greater coordination, whether it's with the labor market, whether it's with this higher learning, higher institutions of learning, or whether it's with the schooling system itself.
Yeah.
You know, to what extent is the employee-linked, how's the employee-linked schemes to the TVET system? What's happening there? Is there greater coordination in that respect? You've got the intervention of the NTA levies that we have. Yeah. To what extent? Because the facility itself is liquid. They're sitting on quite a bit of money there. But to what extent can it be used for employee-linked schemes? Even if you do a pilot process within the metro municipalities, if it were, or the bigger municipalities, because the greater migration of people comes to the cities. So if you use some of these NTA training levies within the municipality system, because they're local government, and say that they're going to do an employee link scheme to be able within the urban areas, so that you can absorb UNEM students, you can absorb NAST students, you can absorb IUM students, and other related higher learning institutions. And through that, you would then have that greater coordination, right? To the extent that, again, within the procurement system, if you are able to say the agency with which decisions need to be made to be able to implement, to make sure that by the time we come to budget season, that's done. You could, where institutions perhaps don't perform to that extent, perhaps they must be then held accountable, right? In terms of maybe their development budget being cut, or whatever mechanisms. But at the same time, that particular ministry or department can then take to task the central procurement system to say that, look, we've not been able to fully max out our development budget because of your procurement process. You see, what would that would then mean that coordination would have to come. What are the timelines in terms of, once I give you my document, when do I want my document back? And to the extent that you manage the review process as well, to say what are the main challenges that lead to the delays in awards and implementations subsequently. And through that, you would get that greater coordination to make sure that we are able to perform and implement timelessly.
Well, it's one thing to say spend. It's also one thing to hold those who must spend accountable. There has been a problem over the years. There's been surely resources falling through the cracks. How do we rein that in?
And that's really the accountability component, you know. Speaking of which, again, the Honorable Minister spoke about labor-intensive sectors that needs to be propelled now. And one of those sectors is obviously agriculture. And again, we have invested quite a bit into the green schemes, huge investments that's gone into that. What has been the return on that investment? Where I was now at AMTA as well, we had invested quite a bit in those fresh produce hubs. The current utilization capacity of those hubs is low, right? To what extent can we sort of make sure that that accountability on that investment is being accounted for, and I think those are the follow-through mechanisms that we need to have, because in the absence of that, we'll be coming here to say that, look, we've done this, but there's no results to show for it.
Well, similar to the education sector as you mentioned earlier on, huh?
Absolutely. I mean, you putting out around 30,000 young people every year to the streets. I think, obviously, now that we are getting the census, which is good. I think the current stats, the estimated numbers is that over 60% of the population are below the age of 35. Obviously, a more accurate number will come with a census. And again, if that is the case, and you've got 30,000 that you are putting out every year on the streets, it becomes a problem in terms of the unemployment crisis that we could be sitting with. And this is why education is so important. I think the minister also made the admission that it's not a money problem. It's really the efficiencies that we need to build. It's the reforms that we need to see. It's the strategies and the interventions that we need to see to be able to make sure we come to an outcome-based curriculum that speaks to where kids perhaps no longer have an option of only science or commerce from grade 10 to grade 12, from grade 10 into grade 11, but maybe from grade 10 or grade 6 even, or grade 8, you can move towards the vocational training aspect as opposed to going through the school system. So those are the sort of solutions that one would want to really explore, because not all of us are fit for perhaps the formal schooling system that we know. But I think the development phase, which comes from grade 1 to grade 7, where you need to operate within a structure, apply yourself, focus for a certain period of time, because this is a development phase of a child. But after that, which means that you get to grade 8, I think the choice then should be there to say, do you go to vocational training center, and through vocational training center, this is the field that can be explored, or do you go to the formal schooling, if it were, and this is the field that you can explore, as opposed to maybe getting to grade 10, and that's where the choice is being made, and by the time, maybe we could have done greater damage to the choice that should have been given to the learners.
Well, Mr. Hei, thank you very much for your time this evening, and we wish you well going forward.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, to our viewers, that's it from the Evening Review team this evening. Have a pleasant evening. See you again tomorrow, same time, same place.